everybody, if you could find your way to a seat, we'll get started in just a minute. I'm stalling so Lily can get back from the bathroom. Don't tell her I told you that. It's good to see everyone here tonight on behalf of the Center for Christian Study at USF. Our fellows, our faculty team, our panelists tonight, our gracious hosts, Tampa Covenant Church. Isn't this a beautiful building? This is a beautiful space. All right. We want to welcome you to this conversation. My name is Brian, and we're calling this conversation a Christian response to AI. If you don't know what the letters AI stand for, you probably are in the wrong room. The Center for Christian Study exists in part to sponsor not only these kinds of conversations, but to support the kind of dialogue that drives them. Thoughtful Christian engagement with real-time issues and integrating historic Christian theology into every sphere of life. This is what we want to do. So the goal tonight is not to bend anyone to one particular point of view, but to increase all of our ability to think and ultimately, I think, hear God and discern truth, what is true. And I think we do that through dialogue, through civil dialogue and an invitation to the one who is truth and leads us into all truth. And so AI is certainly a hot topic right now. Every day it seems to get more and more important. So some of you are here because you're dialed into that. You're thinking about it. You're working on it. You're using it, or you're dealing with it in some way. Some of you just sense that maybe this is important, and some of you just your friend told you to come, so you're here, and that's all good. It's all good. There will be a very simple program tonight. I'm going to invite up our panelists. I will ask them some questions. We'll have a sort of conversation in front of you, which hopefully will be meaningful for them and for you. And then we'll have an open time of question and answer. So if you do have a kind of percolating thought or question, please hold on to it. And then at the end, there will be a chance. Somebody will run around with a microphone. There will be a chance to ask questions and get a thoughtful response. Does that sound good? So I was running, maybe you've had this experience. I was running a think tank last week. And just for context, we're trying to think about the sort of taxonomy of a city, like the ecology of a city, economic, political, social spheres of a city. So to prepare for this think tank, I read about 20 books. I wasn't trying to impress you, but I did. And then I was reading articles, and I was trying to think, okay, how are we going to synthesize this? I experts from all around, actually the world, from 3 different countries, and we were going to have this think tank. And then I made the mistake of running my core question through ChatGPT. And so all the work I did, I imagine that I'm actually good at synthesis, and I'm good at pattern recognition and so on. And I just had this horrible feeling, I don't know if you've had it, where you put it in chat and it's better than all the work you've done to that point. And you just feel strange and deflated. It reminds me, has anyone seen the movie called Yesterday? Okay, it's a sort of fantasy idea that something happens, a power pop or something happens, and the Beatles disappear. The band, the Beatles, they don't exist anymore. They never existed. There's a handful of people that it doesn't work on, so they remember the Beatles. And this one guy in particular who's sort of a washed-up singer-songwriter who's never been able to make it as a musician. Now are you remembering the movie? And he's got a nice voice, and he plays a song for his friends, like he plays Yesterday or something. His friends are like, oh, it's a really good song. That's probably the best song you've ever played. He's like, yeah, it's the Beatles. They're like, who's the Beatles? Do you remember this? So that's the premise of the movie. And then he tries to remember all the Beatles songs he can remember. And he becomes a sensation overnight. He becomes one of the greatest singer-songwriters in the world because his catalog is Beatles songs, like all the Beatles songs that he can remember, right? Anyway, there's this great scene where Ed Sheeran, the actual Ed Sheeran, who himself is an excellent songwriter, they're having this kind of after party because he asks this Jack Malik is the character's name to open for him in one of his concerts. And afterwards he's like, all right, let's find out right now who's the best songwriter. So I'm going to go through that door. This is Ed Sheeran. I'm going to go through that door. You're going to go through that door. We have 10 minutes. You have to write a brand new song that no one's ever written before. You can't be anything you've used before. And we're going to find out who the best songwriter is right now. Anyway, they go back 10 minutes. Ed Sheeran comes out. He plays actually a really beautiful song that he wrote in 10 minutes. Lyrically, instrumentally, it's beautiful. And then this character, Jack, sits down at the piano and plays The Long and Winding Road by the Beatles, you know. Anyway, the reason why I bring that up is because in the scene, Ed Sheeran's just sort of like dying inside. And his friend gets up and says, okay, let's vote, because it's a party and there's a bunch of people. Let's vote on who and he said, no, we're not going to vote. He says, listen, that's probably one of the best songs I've ever heard in my life. And there's this sort of sad, crestfallen moment where Ed Sheeran's like, look, people told me that someone was going to come along that was better than me. And I guess this is that moment. I'm definitely Salieri and you're Mozart, man. And he just leaves sad. And that's how I feel with ChatGPT. I'm definitely Salieri and it's Mozart. But of course, the premise of the movie is that's artificial. I mean, it isn't real. Actually, he did not write that song. And so something's going on between human beings and our desire to work and create and be who we are, and this emerging, this nascent technology, which, if it hasn't already, may leave you feeling the way that I felt that day of like, maybe I'm being replaced. Maybe something very much better can do it in a lot less time. So we have to think about who we are in light of this new emerging technology. So some of the tensions we'll explore tonight: use and refusal, efficiency and formation, power and presence, innovation and wisdom. And maybe we can get these guys, this amazing panel, to help us with some frameworks for how to think faithfully, not just about AI now, but in the future, and really any tech changes or surprises that come our way. So before I invite them up, just forgive me if this is redundant, but AI stands for artificial intelligence. I'm going to give you a couple little definitions here that we need to know. It's just a branch of computer science that creates systems capable of performing tasks typically requiring human intelligence. So reasoning, learning, problem solving, perception. This is what this field is. It's a very broad field. It's not just one thing. It's not just ChatGPT. I'll give you a couple other important terms that may be useful. Weak versus strong AI. Weak or narrow AI. It's something like an algorithm is weak, or your sort of suggested purchases on Amazon. That's weak AI. It's a specific function. But even something like Deep Blue, which plays chess and beats everyone at chess, is weak AI. It has one programmed purpose. That's weak AI. And then there's this emerging idea of what's called strong or generative AI, or AGI, artificial general intelligence. This is when artificial intelligence gets to the level of human intelligence. That means it does its own reasoning, its own connecting. And so that we're going to touch on that. And then the last term I'll give, well, maybe two more. Then above that would be ASI, artificial superintelligence, and that's something that begins to match and then exceed human knowledge. and of course an ability to think and solve problems better than we can. That doesn't yet exist, but it seems, on the horizon. And lastly, probably the thing you're most familiar with, at least in terms of AI now, is the idea of a large language model. That's what, when you dump a lot of words and writing and stuff into something like ChatGPT, OpenAI, Anthropic, all those things, those are large language models. They're taking all of that knowledge to generate a thought or a summary or whatever from that. Good enough? I'm already bored by that. But we made it through. So let me just invite up my panel. You guys come on up. Give them a hand. Did everyone get a water bottle but me? I feel sad. Well, aren't they beautiful? Kareem, you always sit the farthest from me. Should I take that personally or no?
I wanted to show off my outfit.
You did, yeah. He's like, look, he's legit. He's like, he came directly from the hospital.
Just for the occasion.
Mm-hmm. Dr.
Sorry,
Kareem,
sorry.
Yeah, let me introduce you. Dr. Kareem Hanna teaches at the Marsani College of Medicine at USF. He's family medicine. He writes extensively on the application of AI in medicine and medical education. So you're gonna learn a lot from him from that point of view. Dr. Lily Abidal and Dr. Dolores Morris are both professors of philosophy at USF. They're writing and researching the topic of AI and its implications in higher education and human formation. So they're gonna come at you from that angle. Michael Sakasis is my distinguished counterpart at the University of Florida, leading the Christian Studies Center there, and a part of the AI and Faith Fellows, writing extensively on AI as a cultural commentator on technology and society. And I'm Brian, and I like to read. Yeah. So let's just start by you guys just doing introductory comments, just any way you want to start to think about this moment that we're in and the implications for the world you inhabit. So whoever wants to go first, just each of you give us a kind of... Is it on?
Big question. I think a lot of times when we think about artificial intelligence, people have a lot of very high-minded things that how is this going to change the landscape of all of these various industries, education, medicine, et cetera. The thing that plagues me personally the most, as someone who spends a lot of time thinking about virtue ethics and formation in the context of not only education, but even our homes, is how it impacts our own practical decision-making. Kind of the word that we use to talk about that in virtue ethics is prudence. How does it transform and potentially change the way that we make decisions, and then also our ability to make decisions well? And I'm thinking about this especially in regards to young people, because prudence and being able to make decisions is something that requires exercise. So it's not something where you can just tell people, like, here are some principles to apply, and someone knows readily how to apply those. There's so many contextual things that have to be taken into account. There's affective components of how we make good decisions, how we temper our fears and emotions in various different circumstances and situations. And a lot of that is born out of struggle and wrestling with difficult situations. So kind of just on a natural human capability level, that's one, prudence, which is an acquired virtue. It's a natural virtue, or not natural virtue, but something that we all can possess, whether we're Christian or not. This is something that we have to be concerned about. Kind of taking that to the level of Christian analysis, I'm thinking about discernment. When When I think about discernment, specifically in a Christian context, I think about, I'm going to use a little anecdote from my time in high school. You'll see where I'm going with this when I eventually get there, but stay with me.
These are legendary. These are legendary. Lily's time in high school.
Yeah. Any of you that grew up in the 2000s and the late 90s know that that was a really peak time for some excellent music.
Was it there?
No, that was said sarcastically.
Okay.
And also dancing. That would happen at our school dances, and I went to a Catholic school. And one thing that the priests and the nuns that were always there, like as chaperones, at our dances.
They weren't dancing also?
They were
No,
not, especially
no.
the way that people did in the 90s, or late, early 2000s. Is they would say, leave room for the Holy Spirit. So leave enough room between you where Jesus and the Holy Spirit can fit. And that phrase keeps coming to mind as I'm thinking about artificial intelligence. The space between moral dilemma and solution, that gap that normally we would invoke the counsel of the Holy Spirit, where we have time for prayer, I feel like that gap is closing, especially for young people that are growing up during a time where that gap is notoriously small, at least from my anecdotal conversations that I've had with students and young people that are using this on a regular basis, for everything from how to write, text messages to get someone to date you on Tinder, which verified sources have told me that this is something that ChatGPT and other things are being used for. How to, have a conversation with a friend that you're angry with. These are all things that we would need to practically discern the right way to approach and the right way to talk and need to be wrestled with. And instead of doing all of that wrestling, seeking counsel from other friends, praying about it, they're just popping it right into ChatGPT, getting an answer, and going with whatever they get, because it's obviously the easiest. If I had that when I was trying to navigate middle school drama as a young girl, I probably would have taken it myself. So the mundane is really what is at forefront of my mind, and how these kinds of technologies are reshaping what it means to be a good decision maker, and maybe even some of the stopgaps and some of the space that we might need to intentionally place in those in all of the areas of our lives which we expect to form young people, so that we can keep the space where we need it. So that's my
Leave room for the
my
Holy
first.
Spirit.
Yeah,
Got it.
leave room for the Holy Spirit.
Dolores.
We got that talk at dances as well. Yeah. So Lily and I agree on so much of this stuff, and I'm also in the position of, students telling me that their default now, if they have to apologize to a friend, is to use ChatGPT to do it. And this adding a filter, like an additional layer between human relationships, that worries me. But for me, my primary focus, all the way back to graduate school, more recently I do more philosophy of religion, but philosophy of mind is what I really studied. That's what I wrote on, that's what I still spend a lot of, I teach it all the time. And up until a few years ago, it was a really interesting intellectual puzzle that we as a people are so unclear about what our minds are and what we are, right? These categories kind of come together. So we don't have a collective societal belief in something like a soul, for example, right? Or in something like a strong importance on biology, where our human species is at least something special and distinct. One part of growing pluralism has been a loss of a shared set of ideas of what a person is and why they should be considered important and what a mind is. And until a few years ago, that was just fun stuff to talk about in class. And now it's pressing because we use words like knowledge, and we don't really know what we mean by that. And we use the word understanding, and we don't really know what we mean by that. And there is this hurdle in philosophy of mind. That's what makes it such an interesting and fun thing to study, I think, which is that even between human beings, there is an aspect of consciousness that is inaccessible to anybody else, right? The way I like to talk about it in my philosophy of mind class is, like, if you're dating somebody, there are these questions like, when am I going to introduce you to my friends? When am I going to introduce you to my parents? When am I going to let you have access to my private thoughts? It's like not a step you have to take, because even if you wanted to be that codependent and intermingled, it's literally impossible. When we say, I feel your pain, I don't. I feel my pain. Or I might sympathetically think about we can't access each other's experiences. So that's a sidebar, right? And that's just an interesting fact. But that means that we just, we infer that other people have a rich inner life just like we do. And that's a good inference to make. The problem is now we have these machines that can use our language like we can, and so we're making the same inference. And we're really comfortable making it because we weren't ever really all that sure on why we were making it in the first place. Is this because we have the same kind of brain? Is it because we were created in the image of God? Is it because we think we have a soul? So suddenly all of the lack of a shared scaffolding about these ideas has real-world consequences where people will say things like, nobody understands me like this AI model. People were extremely upset when they discontinued a recent model because they felt like this one understood them and the new one doesn't. And it may be hard to see why I think that's all connected, but I really think quite a lot of it comes down to the fact that words like, so knowledge, I heard somebody talking about how people are worried that there's this, nobody's gonna know stuff anymore. Don't worry, the knowledge is still there, right? The algorithm has it. I don't think that's what knowledge is. I don't think that's how knowledge works. And so my concerns are, how do we navigate all of this now without a shared framework to fall back on and rely on and appeal to? And here I think, though, the church has an advantage. We have much more of a shared framework than sort of society at large. So that's where I think I'm hopeful that the church will sort of step up a little bit here.
That's good. Yeah, Mike.
So Derek Thompson, who's a journalist who's done a lot, I think, to write relatively clearly and in a somewhat sane way about AI, recently published, I think just within the last week, an essay that was titled, Nobody Knows Anything, as with regards to the state of AI presently and where it's going. This is overwhelmingly what I feel in trying to keep up with the landscape that changes dramatically, seems sometimes to slow down and then to radically speed up. The range of competing claims about what artificial intelligence means for the human species literally ranges from untold prosperity and affluence to the extinction of the human race. And it is not as if one could simply say, well, those are the wackos on the fringes. You can find highly credentialed and otherwise respectable people espousing those positions and everything in between. And those are the people within industry, those are the technologists, those are the people who certainly, I would say, are beyond me in understanding the technicalities involved. From another perspective, AI is not one thing, as Brian indicated earlier. It is a kind of technical layer being added to the whole of society, and it has economic ramifications. One of the large questions, I think, now animating policymakers is whether there will be entry-level jobs for college graduates in white-collar work within 1 year. It has political implications. It has implications for military affairs. I think nothing has unnerved me more, I will say, than the very present spat between the Department of Defense and Anthropic, and what the DoD is demanding Anthropic by 11:30 or 5:01 tomorrow, I think is probably one of the things that has given me most concern thinking about AI over the past several years. So it's impossibly difficult to try to get a purchase on what AI means for human society. I'm reminded of one of my favorite philosophers, Hannah Arendt, who liked to talk about the kind of thinking that we now do as being thinking without a banister. And the idea is kind of going up a staircase, and you have a banister to lean on to steady yourself. And in her view, post-mid-20th century, we're thinking without a banister. And in many respects, that's how I feel with regards to AI. I'm interested as well in what I've been describing as a thesis. My thesis is that the arc of AI bends towards demoralization. And you gave me, Brian, a wonderful anecdote from that movie, which I had not seen, because I think even in your description of your experience, I think this captures and a kind of anecdote that people will tell from regarding very different kinds of experiences with AI, but it all amounts to a kind of demoralization. And so I'm very interested in exploring how that is the case, or why that is the case. I think it has something to do with the severing of judgment and thinking and willing and responsibility that is a kind of byproduct of inserting AI into human affairs. And then finally, I'm also interested in how AI, in many respects, is just the apotheosis or the culmination of long-standing trends that have characterized technological modernity since the 1600s at least. And so in many respects, it's not necessarily something wholly novel. It is what we have been aiming at for a very long time, and I think it needs to be understood along those lines as well. So those are just a few thoughts to kind of get us warmed up.
Well said.
All right. So the question of where we are at right now, I was going to say discernment, and then I was going to say knowledge. And they took all my answers because I was going to go next into this, like, there are some good and some bad and some concerns. I'm going to try to answer this question first as a Christian, and then as a husband and a father, and then as a clinician. And I think I'll try to use that framework as something that we can leverage. As a Christian, I should see everything through that lens. Whatever I come at, those are the glasses that I'm wearing, and it doesn't matter what I'm coming into encounter with, I'm seeing it through that lens. AI is a new thing, but it's not really that new. It's actually been around forever. I mean, did you know in the 1910s, before World War I, we were flying airplanes for about 3 hours without the pilot's intervention. So there was autopilot 100 years ago, right? And you think, the self-driving car is the AI of today. It's brand new, but it's 100 years old. And we were counting platelets on blood samples from the 70s. No one sits and counts platelets manually, right? But you can get a platelet count with the computer from the 1970s. Machines were already doing a lot of these things. And of course, calculators have been used. These are all the small AI that Brian was referring to earlier. But there are some concerns as a Christian that there is the lack of the human connection that we've alluded to already. As I was walking in, I saw the painting of St. Mary visiting Elizabeth. And it's this wonderful idea that once she got the Annunciation from the Archangel, she packed her bag and went straight to visit her family member who was in need. But today, I wonder if that visit would take place. I just wonder, would it have been a text message like, hey, you good? Right? But there's something about that human connection, that servitude, that love for neighbor, that drove her to get up and encounter another human. So as a Christian, I worry that AI kind of gets in the way or severs relationship or can impact. As a husband and as a father, I think it's cool. There are a lot of really cool things that I can do as I can learn to fix anything now. But just because AI can teach me all the steps that I need to fix your roof does not mean you should trust me to fix your roof. Okay? Because that's the knowledge piece. There's an experiential knowledge, and then there's the theoretical, I can tell you all the steps. Doesn't mean you should trust me to change your roof. And I bet you they're correct. They are the right steps. So it almost gives me a false confidence. And because it came out of a machine, there's this thing called automation bias. Because it came out of a machine, I trust it more, right? It told me, no, you should turn left here. I know Tampa really well. I can get around Tampa without a GPS. I know it's crazy, right? It's crazy. I grew up here, and this is home. My wife always thinks it's awesome, so I get kudos points every time. I'm like, no, you can turn left here. You don't have to go around that way. But we trust tech. We trust tech because it's coming from a machine. Even if I say the same thing, you're more likely to trust the technology. So as a clinician, there are some things though as a clinician that are wonderful. It's going to help me be a better doctor. What does that look like? What is better? Is it going to help me diagnose things faster? Is it going to help me make the correct diagnosis or the correct prescription for you? Is it going to catch me in my mistakes? I hope it does. I really hope it does. There are lots of benefits that we can talk about. But is it going to harm the relationship? Is it going to hurt the interaction, the care that I can share in tough moments with my patients? Because the patient has already asked ChatGPT. I feel like we use that word like Kleenex. Like it's not actually a Kleenex, but Kleenex is the brand that's really popular. Okay, so it's just become the face. I'm sure there's a name for this concept, but I don't know what it is. But is it going to get in the way of my interaction with people? And that's where I worry. But yeah, it's going to make me way more efficient. The question, though, is if I want you to, let's talk about exercise, and you go to your doctor, and your doctor's like, so how's your exercise doing? And of course, all of you are exercising every day, I have no doubt. But your doctor asks you about your exercise, and you start to tell him, well, I go about 3 or 4 miles every day. Wow, 3 or 4 miles, that's fantastic. The doctor walks out the room, and your spouse nudges you. What do you mean you go 3 or 4 miles? Well, I drive 3 or 4 miles every day.
In my mind, I go 10 miles.
There you go.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, the driving, that's not any good for my exercise. Do you walk or run or ride your bike for 3 or 4 miles? No, that's too slow. So this is an example. I like to use it with my students, where going faster is not necessarily better. And sometimes speed is not an advantage. It's good for me to go and run the 3 miles. It doesn't do me any good to ride my car for 3 miles. Sure, it moves me from point A to point B, but then what? The exercise goal was not accomplished. So we need to discern when is the tool right for the job, or what is the job that needs to be accomplished, and this thing that I can leverage, this AI tool, I can use it for certain things appropriately and, of course, inappropriately. And the last thing I'll say is if I give you a 2x4 and a bunch of nails, and I say, I need you to get these nails into the 2x4, here's a pencil. You'd probably look at me funny. And I'd say, well, you could do it. You have arms that could swing really, really hard, and you could probably make them dent the wood a little bit, and maybe get them to stand up a little. It'd be hard to drive it all the way through, though. But if I said, here's an iPhone, you'd say, okay, I can drive a nail with an iPhone, but it's going to mess up the iPhone. There are harms to the iPhone. There are harms of doing this thing with this tool that can take place. Some tools are inefficient. Some tools are going to cause harm. And then there's the hammer that does it efficiently and without harm. So we have to be able to decide what tool AI is appropriate, or what task AI is an appropriate tool for. And I think that's part of our discussion today. And through those glasses that I talked about at the beginning, if I see it as a Christian first, then I can decide on the knowledge or the morality of the issue, or this, that, or the other thing.
I mean, having read all 4 of your stuff, I think slowing down is actually a theme you all share in slightly different ways. You talk about friction, you talk about knowledge. So but let's switch gears here. So it may be a strange place to start, but before we talk about what is artificial, that is to say, artificial in regards to humanity, let's talk about what it means to be human. We don't spend a ton of time on this, but maybe we need that as a reference point here. And anything that maybe detracts from, it sounds like, anything that strips us of our humanity, which theologically I think we'd all agree, being made in the image of God, the Imago Dei is this divine dignity that we carry as human beings. We're not animals. We're not machines. So anything that causes us to maybe lose that would be problematic for us as Christian people. So let's talk about that. But I specifically, Lily, I'm going to start with you. You talk about, in your stuff, you talk about truth. Like AI can't tell the truth. There's actually a technical term, hallucination, which apparently that's what AI does. It hallucinates, which is, I guess, essentially, it just tells you something that's wrong. It thinks it's true. But talk about that, because you talk about, you actually say AI is fluent, tireless, and a sycophant. So I want you to unpack that a little bit, but I think part of what you're trying to maybe get at is like AI can't tell the truth. It can't search for truth. It can't know truth. So our quest for truth, how is it aided by this thing? So talk about truth.
Yeah, so what a hallucination really is it's when there's this problem with in AI generally speaking, where you can design it to do certain tasks and you can program the model in such a way, but there's what we call the black box problem, where you can't ever fully know exactly why it comes up with the output that it comes out with once it's gotten it. And hallucination is sort of an occasion of the black box problem, where it comes up with something and we can't really give any particular rhyme or reason why it did, but the way that it's programmed, it probably shouldn't have. If it has access to all of this information, if you upload it with several, for instance, a large language model with several different PDFs, and you ask it to tell you or give a synthesis of, how many times it comes up with a specific word, it should easily be able to do that. And for the most of the time, it does. It can tell you, it can give you the exact number of the occurrences of that particular word. It might tell you themes that these few things share, but every so often it says something just very blatantly incorrect that sometimes might not actually be very blatant. It might sound like it's really right. A lot of this is because the way that it works is it's all in terms of probabilities. It's pattern recognition, and it basically provides what is the most likely next token in a sequence of language or in a sentence. And when something is fed so much data that it recognizes all of the patterns of human language, whether that's coming from Reddit or it's coming from the classics, it can reliably predict the occurrence that these two words are going to come next to each other, given the way that you prompt it, right? Now, that's not really reasoning, and Dolores can probably say a lot more about this than I can with the specifics and kind of the philosophy of mind background, but that's most certainly just producing probabilities or what statistically is likely is not a search for truth specifically. So it's not particularly good at helping us find that, okay? Now, I get a lot of pushback from my colleagues even when I say something like that and kind of try to make some of these distinctions. They'll say something, or they might give an objection or a rebuttal like this, which is, well, part of the way that human beings search for truth is in dialogue. Okay, this is kind of the quintessential way that the philosophers did this. All the Platonic, dialogues are dialogues. They're conversations between, Socrates and some interlocutor, and there's this back and forth exchange and iterative process that hopefully gets us to, although not really the case for a lot of Socrates' interlocutors, unfortunately for them, closer to the truth, right? That's oftentimes when we're having discussions in classes and having discussions with our friends and conversations, that's what we're trying to do, okay? And sometimes in that conversation, or at least in a good faith conversation, we would hope that the other person we're talking to is on the same mission, right? They want to get to the truth too. Whether it's about, what time do we need to start packing up for the vacation this weekend, the conversation, in good faith, of course, is to get to an answer. It's to discuss something with another person that has the intention of communicating reality to us and getting to reality. So what they push back on me about is, couldn't these large language models, or couldn't even artificial versions of intelligence be helpful for us going through this iterative process, okay? It's not always the case that a human being might be available to entertain my interests, my academic interests, or the questions that I have. So in the event that a human being is not available and ready to have this kind of conversation, why not? Why not use a chatbot? This is actually a really live conversation even in the Christian community. I'll give a couple anecdotal examples. There's this new tool, it's built kind of on the same, general, it's used from some of the open source, OpenAI models that are readily available for people to use and adapt kind of in an API format. And it's called Magisterium AI. There's many versions of it. Magisterium AI, of course, alluding to the magisterium of the Catholic Church, the decision-making body that, tells Catholics, generally speaking, what to believe about faith and morals, kind of dialing down on certain doctrinal matters.
And Lily is Catholic, by the way.
Yeah, I'm Catholic. Another one is Truthly AI, and both of them, the way that they market themselves to the faithful, particularly in these situations, Catholics, but there's other versions of this that are not specifically Catholic, is that if you have a question about the faith, something that is really plaguing you about the Trinity or about an interpretation of a specific Bible passage, and you don't have a minister or a priest or a pastor available to discuss this with you, you can use this. And I have written a couple of things about how I just think that's a horrible idea on so many different levels. But it's a live debate right now in the Christian community as to what might be sacrificed in outsourcing that kind of dialogue that seems to be something that's purely intellectual. I have a question about some matter of the faith that is an article of faith, something I'm supposed to believe, and I want it explained to me really well. And the question is, if the chatbot can explain it maybe more accurately than the layperson that's teaching religious formation at our church, why would we prefer the person? Why would we want a lay minister? Why would we want an actual human being to be involved in that exchange, searching for the truth about the things that we believe as Christians instead of a chatbot? What is it that we're sacrificing there? And I think in order to really understand that, we have to understand that the purpose of the truth is not necessarily and exclusively about accuracy. The way that we like to talk about it in several different encyclicals that have been written within the Catholic Church is that there's an encounter that occurs in the process of receiving the truth. It's not just, a statement that somebody grabs onto and then believes and accepts, but there might be something really specific about the nature of that encounter and what happens when we receive the truth from a member of the church. And I think that what's distinct about it is grace. Now, I don't want to say that it's impossible for the Holy Spirit to work through a large language model. I don't necessarily think that's the case, but I'm still trying to work some of this out.
You do say in your article, the Holy Spirit does not guide large language models.
Yes, not guide.
Which tracks for me.
Yes, no, that tracks. I do think there might be a few layers of distinctions that we might want to make there. Do I think that it's possible for somebody, and apparently a lot of these companies like Magisterium AI are getting feedback from some of the users that people are having conversations with them, and then after years of not really feeling any move to, accept Jesus into their lives, now they're all of a sudden wanting to be baptized. So because of some of the conversations and clarity that they've gotten by virtue of these things. So lots of really complicated stuff. But I'll end it by saying it's impossible, I think, for us to train a large language model or any kind of even general artificial intelligence to search for truth in the way that a human desires truth.
Yeah.
And that's because we have a soul. And then there's a lot more that is to be said there, but I will stop.
Yeah. I mean, it's a profound idea that the hallucination is because it's probabilistic. It's never actually trying to give you the actual truth. It's just always trying to say as close as it can get. Whereas a human being is wrong a lot, but we're also capable of delivering something that's just profoundly and totally true because of God's work through us as human beings.
Can
Want
I
to say something about that? Yeah.
A real quick thing, because I have a Substack post sitting in drafts for too long now with the title "AI Does Not Hallucinate," and I think that how we use our words is so important. And to have a hallucination is to have an experience that doesn't track to reality. But now we use the word hallucinate. You're right. This is the standard
It's
term.
anthropomorphism. We're already giving it human qualities.
I know it would not be the first time I was called pedantic, right? But I actually think it's incredibly important that we use certain words carefully. AI is not hallucinating because it isn't having experiences. I don't even think the biggest advocates of AI right now think it's currently having experiences. Also, AI doesn't lie to you. It gets things wrong because it doesn't even have a function that is truth tracking. It's probabilistic prediction. And that's not to minimize it. AI is incredible at finding patterns, and it is incredible at generating language that sounds human. But we use language as a way of communicating things about our interaction with this shared world. AI does not interact with the world. It's never checking the meaning of words against reality itself. That's a step that doesn't ever even come up. And so when we use words like lie and hallucinate, we put ourselves in a position where we do this, especially children, right? But adults too, we are trained to think that we're not smart enough to correct a supercomputer, right? So anything that comes out of AI comes with such a high degree of authority that it really shouldn't have. And I think we continue to feed that sense that this is a very high authority when we use anthropomorphic mental language about these things, that it doesn't track to what they're actually doing.
And Mike, you talk about like how AI habituates us, like the use of it also maybe takes something away from us. So it's like in one sense we want to take this technology and pretend like it's human when it isn't. But also at the same time when we do that, it's somehow dehumanizing us. I think you talk about like delegation of your life, like you you shouldn't or can't delegate your life to something else. Life has to be lived. And so we get in this sort of managed life, I think is the terms you want to use. Like your life is kind of run by something else. This is also something that troubles me, as a way in which, and I know you guys too, like we if I use the map to figure out where to go, if I use Google Maps to figure out where to go, over time I'll not be able to navigate anymore. I'm giving that up for something that's more useful, you know?
I've given it.
You gave it up, yeah. Which is fine. Maybe it's a trade you're willing to make, but you lose something to gain that, right? But then you guys are talking about thinking itself. Like, can I even think critically? Can I even form a thought? Can I write? Those kind of things. Is that the future? But talk a little bit about like the habituation of like using things changes us. It changes the way we live.
I sometimes joke that the only reason I care about technology is because I sort of buy into a virtue ethic theory of moral formation. And if we imagine that our character serves as a product of inclinations that are an outgrowth of our habits, and then that those habits and inclinations solidify into virtues and vices, then it becomes very important as embodied creatures to pay attention to the devices, the tools, the interfaces that mediate the mind-body world link, right? So some of the most powerful habits we form are formed through our use of technology. I mean, you can think for yourself, what's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning? For many people, it is to instinctively reach for a smartphone and to begin scrolling. or even sitting at a traffic light. What do you do as soon as the car comes? Hopefully, you're not already looking at your phone, right? But you're reaching for that phone. So those habits become increasingly important because they end up determining the person that you become. So this is one reason I think why it's important to not only ask what are the good and bad uses to which I can put a particular technology. That's obviously a fair question to ask and an important one. But even if the answer to your question is I am only putting the technology to elicit use, in other words, I'm only putting it to a good use, that does not mean that you are not being formed by it in other more subtle ways. So whenever we use, I'm old enough to remember little AOL CDs, right? That you popped in, dial-up internet, the little noise. And then, of course, you get a faster internet, you get faster processing power. When I first was using the internet and an image was pixelating line by line, I thought it was amazing, right? But if I had to go through that right now, I would
You throw your computer
throw the
through
computer out the window, right? Yeah. So something has happened, right? What has happened is that I've become increasingly habituated to a certain velocity, a speed, right? Or to put it a different way, my capacity for patience has been eroded. So if I continuously use technologies to make processes more efficient or optimal, or if I optimize for speed, and I always tell myself, well, it's for a good reason, I'm not doing anything illicit with it, nonetheless, there's a kind of formation that is happening. So that's, I think, part of why paying attention to the habits and practices that form around our technology use is so important, and why we can't only ask, am I doing a good thing with it? Because even, again, irrespective of the moral standing of the thing that you're using it to do, there is some other formative layer that is happening, formative action that is happening. And there's always the outsourcing problem, which I think is part of what your question alluded to, which is as old as Plato's Critique of Writing in the Phaedrus. And so that I call it the text of technology criticism. And there are two reactions to that text, and one is to say, well, you see, everything turned out okay anyway, and these are all moral panics. The other is to say, well, Plato is basically right. And so we learn to write, and the critique is that it's told in the form of a myth. I won't go into it, but basically, Plato has Socrates say, well, Plato has a character that Socrates is telling the story, never mind, say that writing isn't a gift that helps us recall. It actually inhibits us from recollection. Much more pithily, Marshall McLuhan talks about how every technology that is an augmentation is also an amputation. And so whatever we use to augment capacity, we're simultaneously amputating that capacity from ourselves. So for example, the augmentation of getting around using GPS, which makes us feel like we have a superpower now, we can go around anywhere. In fact, what you're losing is a native capacity to navigate space yourself, which I think then has moral consequences to the degree that we as embodied creatures inhabit space, and we have a kind of moral relationship to not only other human beings, but to places and to space and to time. And so there are deep moral consequences that come out of our habitual uses of technology.
I mean, it just strikes me that we're kind of talking about, we enter into this relationship essentially with AI. And we also have a relationship with the rest of the world, and there's something being traded. I like that augmentation, amputation thing. It's quite good. So let's dig in a little bit to the kind of use, misuse, and refusal to use. Let's talk about that practically. So Kareem, I'm going to ask you. I'd say a lot of your stuff is pretty positive in the sense that you see a lot of value in AI. You know, you talk about the moral implications of like doctors are administratively burdened, for example. And if we can shave off some of that administrative burden, it allows you to be a better clinician. I think you talk about like, hey, use AI as much as you possibly can, as long as it doesn't stop you from being a human being as a doctor. And I think you say like the person who can use AI and be empathetic, that's going to be the winner as a doctor in the future. But I mean, I'm really interested to hear from you positive uses. Like, what's the good of this thing? Should we all just reject it out of hand? Because it feels to me like, at least in your field, there is real life-flourishing possibilities if we can 10x our diagnostics, if we can, remove the mistakes, whatever. Talk to me about that.
I'll hold the negative for a second, but there is a lot of positive. I'll start with the positive. To use the latest example, the doctor in the room now, if you've seen it, I pull out my cell phone and I have this recording thing that takes place, and I can just chat with you, and by the end of the visit, the note is already written. It's summarized, it's broken down into your history, into your physical exam. As I'm examining you, I say, wow, your heart sounds good, and it puts that in, and I say, oh, your lungs are clear, and I've I've taught it what I mean when I say your heart sounds good. So it writes down my heart exam for me in medical terminology, whatever that means. And then it pieces together an assessment and a plan for you. And you have the note. Once you walk out the room, it's popped up on your phone, and I have the note in the system, and my job, my work is done. Of course, that is one benefit. I could talk to you about the negatives, all of these things. I actually am apprehensive about my students using these tools, because when they don't write, then they don't think. And they don't have to work through what could be going on, what couldn't be going on. But another positive example is the speed at which we discover things. So imagine drug discovery. How long did it take for us to get penicillin? Well, now we can customize drugs for your DNA pattern. Like, it's wild, the stuff that we can do, right? And way faster than we were doing it before. But like I said, AI has existed. It's generative AI that we've really been focusing on this conversation. And generative AI is its own beast that really got popular 2.5-ish years ago, October, I think, of 3 years ago now, 2023, when ChatGPT kind of made its public debut. And that's generative AI. But AI as a system is really helpful. I mean, if you travel, you get on an airplane now and you fly back to the country, and you have to go through, if you have global entry now, before you even pull out your passport, it's scanned my retina. It knows exactly, Kareem has arrived. Yeah, and the balloons come out, and
Yeah, they do.
Kareem's arrived.
They do.
So there are benefits to AI. It makes life safer in that regard. There's drug discovery, procedural things. And imagine the surgeon using the robot to operate on X, Y, and Z, and the surgeon's about to cut, and the robot says, no, don't do that. Don't cut that. That's important. We gotta leave that there. That's helpful. That's a beneficial application. And AI is good at that. It's good at identifying medication contraindications, for example. One of the things I tell my patients, to kind of touch base on something that was mentioned earlier, when I meet them for the first time, I always tell them I'm a human being and I can make mistakes. And I don't know everything. And if I don't know everything, I know where to look for the answer. I can get the right answer. But if we become like, if we think that now the AI is here, that all the answers are going to be answered very quickly, that's a fallacy that we just have to be careful of. But it is fast, and it is helpful in a lot of ways in medicine. Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
If we go back to the garden, Adam and Eve, do you remember what the tree was that they ate from? Of knowledge? Yeah. Is knowledge bad? Knowledge was not bad. It just wasn't right for them at that time. It wasn't yet in God's economy for them to eat of the fruit. They could have done anything else they wanted to do, but they chose that shiny new set of knowledge that was accessible and at their fingertips. I think these tools are shiny and new and attractive, and they have this promise of knowledge. But it wasn't right for them to have it at the time, Adam and Eve, and I don't think that all knowledge or access to knowledge is good. So in medicine, that is a place, though, that it is very helpful. In medicine, knowledge is good. It's helpful. You want your doctor to know more than the other. If you had 2 doctors and you have to pick one that knows more than the other, which one are you going to pick? It's a no-brainer, right? But You also want the doctor who's going to hold your hand through the things that Brian was alluding to, that's going to cry with you and celebrate with you and deliver your baby and take pictures with you. Like that. That's why I love my job, is because I build the rapport with the whole family, and I know their dog's name, and I know where they're going for traveling this summer. Those sorts of things I don't think AI will ever be able to do. So with that in mind, we have to keep grounded, like just keep it real, keep it simple, keep it real, use the tool, but don't become over-reliant.
Your actual line is, the future of medicine belongs to clinicians who can integrate technology without losing empathy. There's something about that seems like almost like a applicable framework for everything, If you can use technology but somehow retain your humanity, and that could go for thinking, for truth seeking, for healthy habits, this is a thing in us which is somehow threatened, to be amputated somehow in this new relationship. So maybe to the other three, let me ask you this. I want to, like as quick as we can, talk about misuse and refusal of use. So like where do you think, like Lily, I know you talk about formation, so I think in some ways you talk about friction or slowness, like slowing down. So when and how, guys, should we be just don't use it for that, or use it for that a little or something? And when is it like, use it as much as you can, just don't use it that way? So talk to me about misuse and refusals to use.
Yeah, so kind of riffing off of the example that we just heard, use it without sacrificing your empathy. I think the problem oftentimes with technologies is everyone thinks they can use them without sacrificing the things about them that are human, right? People go to dinner with their cell phone and they're like, yeah, I won't bother with it. And then somehow it's right there and they're looking at it. I think we have to be especially careful. And I think the way that I answer the question that Brian just posed changes drastically when we're talking about different developmental ages. I think that for young people, and I've said this on many different online platforms, and it sounds a little extreme when I first say it, especially because there's this big push right now to integrate AI into education in so many different ways, but I can think of basically the answer is zero. I don't really think there are a lot of ways in which, especially things like generative AI particularly, that it could be integrated into education that would actually benefit the student, if we're thinking about the word benefit in terms of their long-term, their flourishing as a human being. I think that changes a little bit. The more strength of character that somebody has, I think that it allows them to be better at discerning the ways in which it could be appropriately used in certain contexts. But then it's kind of interesting because I think what they'll find is the ways that they can appropriately use it are not going to be nearly as vast as someone who doesn't have the same strength of character might suspect. So for me, really the lens that I'm thinking about everything through is the development of virtue, and how vulnerable that is at very young ages, and then the maintenance of virtue. And I think the easiest example that I offer my students whenever I talk about virtue in my ethics classes is it's not something that you have, it's not like a one and done, okay? It's something that has to be exercised consistently across contexts, across circumstances. If you think about going to the gym, you don't, lift and do a lot of reps and then acquire this muscle and then you never have to go back to the gym again. You might not have to lift as much to maintain that certain kind of muscle density that you acquired when you first were going, but you most certainly have to continue exercising. It's going to be very difficult in the beginning when you take up that habit at first and you are going because it's something that's new. Your body's not used to it yet, and it feels a lot more strenuous. It might be a little bit easier as time goes on, but you do have to keep going. So I think that there's so many different ways to answer that question that all depend on context, but I think age, level of expertise is two very important considerations. I also think there are definitely some instances in which it's probably never wise to use. I had this hilarious conversation. Well, this was the only part of it that was hilarious. Actually, the guy was like extremely dry that I was talking to. So, but he was an Italian ethicist, and he specializes in artificial intelligence. He runs a think tank that works closely with the Vatican. And this guy is like writing a lot using he's using Bernard Lonergan, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas to think about artificial intelligence and ways to develop technologies that are in line with Catholic social thought and all of these things. Brilliant guy. And he was like, as we're having this conversation, I'm going to tell you something that my brother did, but I don't know how much he would like the fact that I'm telling you this if he was sitting right next to me, so don't repeat it. And I'm like, I'm not going to tell anybody what your brother did, but here I am telling everybody what his brother did. But he's like, my brother used ChatGPT to write his wedding vows. And he's like, and here's the kicker, though. Here's the kicker.
This is being recorded, by the way.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I didn't say his name, so.
You didn't.
But the kicker was,
The Italian guy who writes from the Vatican on AI.
there's a lot of those.
Won't be that
There's a
hard
lot
to
of
find
those.
him, you know
yeah.
what I mean?
There's a lot of them, they're all wearing, their cassocks, and they're all floating around doing this. But the thing that was most striking to me was he's like, I'm not sure what I think about that. And to me, it was very obviously like, this is one of those use cases. Don't do that, okay? If there's anything that's like so obviously,
Write it down, guys. Write it down.
right, don't use AI to write your wedding vows. And we can intuit why that would be the case. There's something sacrificed if you had found out that something that was supposed to be intimate, a signal of somebody's commitment and fidelity to you, they had outsourced to somebody else. There's something that's sacrificed in the context of the relationship if you found out that what they're saying, it almost feels fraudulent, right?
Because it is.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. So I definitely think there are instances, especially those in which we want to maintain and communicate and acquire connection with other human beings where we absolutely don't want to fake that stuff. And it's important not to fake that stuff. Yeah. So anyway, lots more I could say there, but is this actually being recorded?
On refusal, like, you talk about language too, like, I think that's what she's getting at, which is like, you're saying something you didn't say. You're letting something speak for you as if it is your authentic belief or your authentic thought. And that's fraudulent, but it creates a kind of falseness, a false identity almost, like who am I? And did you want to say something about that, language? Like,
I mean, I think that's one of the issues that I would think we need to think most carefully about, and I talk about it in terms of the labor of articulation. So we're outsourcing the labor of articulation, and I think part of the problem is that we don't have a very good theory of language for ourselves. We sometimes think of language as just sort of these labels that we give to ideas and thoughts in our head so that other people can process them, without recognizing that with the labor of articulation, so that work, that internal work of having that feeling, that sense, and figuring out what the right words are, they're going to convey that well. It's not just putting a label on something that's already there, but it's actually giving shape to what's there. And so we come to know what we think by trying to think it and put it into words. Right. We come to understand what we feel sometimes by putting the right label, putting the right language to it. And so when we give up that labor of articulation, it's not just that we're having somebody produce what we would have done otherwise more efficiently. It's that we are sacrificing a bit of what makes us human, I think, right? The former Archbishop of Canterbury in a book, Rowan Williams, in a book about language, I recently came across this phrase that was really arresting to me, and he says that when I talk to somebody else, I have to presume that they own their words as I own mine. And I thought, well, this is exactly the language, right? I cannot be said to own words that I did not put the labor of articulation into producing. And I think there's a subtle but vital rupture there between something that we all take for granted as being essential to our humanity, its capacity to speak, to express ourselves, to use language in the way that the human creature does. And when we outsource that to another, and yet we present it as our own, I think this contributes to that demoralization. And it's not that we necessarily think everybody is now saying things that are false. It's that we no longer have the glue that holds intention, thought, expression, responsibility for our words sort of breaks down in a way that I think is inhumane.
Yeah, can I
Say more, yeah.
quick follow-up on this? Because I think you're exactly right. And then I think there is this inner effect that is probably really hard for those of us, people in the room that are like my age or older, right? This is hard to make sense of. But younger people who spend a great deal of time communicating through something like text, the more they rely on AI to sort of help with this, you'll see people saying, like, yeah, you just read stories, little posts from people, like, oh, I was dating this person, but then he kept sending me these texts that were so clearly AI, and I was like, I want to talk to you, I don't want to talk to, and the answer is, I'm not interesting, I don't have much to say. Like, they lose this inner self-confidence because you can spend, if so much of your life is presented online or over your phone, then you can build up this persona that you don't think you can actually sustain on your own. And then it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the more you rely on that, the less you develop your own ability to figure out what you think and express it. Like when you were talking, Kareem, about traveling by car, Ted Chiang is one of my favorite contemporary sci-fi authors. I don't know if you know Ted Chiang. If you've seen Arrival, it was based on one of his short stories. And he wrote a great piece on AI, and he's like, yeah, if you want to lift more in the gym, you could bring a forklift, right? And of course, you will lift a great deal
Tell
more.
people how much you're lifting, yeah.
Right? But like so for me, I mean, people that know me know I just don't use it. The only thing I use AI for is, I'm sure my Merlin app has AI, and that helps me identify birds, right? But I am pretty far. That's fantastic, right? I'm pretty far on the refusal side, partly because I think we don't see the things that are atrophying in ourselves, and we don't see the way we're giving up. Well, and partly because for my job, there are still plenty of books I need to read. I don't need endlessly more information. I need to slow down and understand the information that I already have.
It's interesting, and by the way, I'm going to do one more round of questions, and I want to open up to you guys. So be thinking if you have questions. It is interesting to almost say a person with character could possibly use this tool. A person who knows their own voice, there could be value in it. It's like, Elisa, who works for me, has made a large language model with all my books and everything I've ever written, and thousands of emails, and she uses it to use my voice. And sometimes I go into it and ask it things, like it speaks to me from my own voice. And I'm like, oh, that's quite good, or I don't remember that, or I like it. But I know, it's quite horrible and vain. That also was recorded. But that's not the point. The point is, there's no way that gets written. None of that stuff can be given back if it didn't have to come out of me, if I didn't have to find a way to say it without help. And that's maybe your point about the forging and the formation of character, of language, of a sense of self, of our relationship with God, of our own theology, of our own inner world, like describing our inner world, has to happen first. And anything that arrests that or challenges that or takes away from that is damaging us. It's not helping us, it's damaging us. So get your questions ready, but I'll just give you one last little round here. And I know this isn't massively practical, but I want to talk about superintelligence, this idea of AGI, this generative thing that the future holds. And there's there is a body of work, and I think, Mike, you made the point. There's strong minds who are saying, for example, there's a book that I read called If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. And this has to do with superintelligence. If we build that thing, and to your black box theory, we're talking about it's an alien intelligence. No one really knows how it comes up with the answers that it comes up with. Even LLMs, we don't really know how does it get that. So that's cool. And then sometimes it does a weird thing, and like, okay, let's try to work around that. So this idea of a superintelligence, if it does get created and has ability to solve problems, the basic idea that I understand is that we think we're smart enough to somehow control that. This is called the alignment problem. If you build something that's better than you, smarter than you, stronger than you, it can make money, it can move money around, it can get Confederates to work for it, all that kind of stuff. We think, well, we can somehow build coding or terms around its creation that make sure that it protects human values. And I think of you guys in particular because, well, what are human values, number one? Who gets to decide what those human values are? Who's in charge of the human values coding part? That's all quite up in the air. Is it just going to be Silicon Valley guys? This is a quote from C.S. Lewis from The Abolition of Man. What we call man's power over nature turns out to be a power exercised by some men over other men with nature as its instrument. So there's a power problem, like who gets to control, who gets to say this is human values. So I don't want to go too deep into it unless you guys want to, but just how do you feel about that? How do you react to this possibility of a very generative AI that can solve the world's problems? Because the high point would be it can make not just bespoke signature drugs but it could actually do research within its own mind to solve problems in a record time and to come up with cures and to solve problems of energy or whatever. These are things that people are hopeful about, utopian kind of vision of superintelligence. But obviously the other side of it is it could just decide that what would really help the earth is to not have human beings on it, something like that. So talk to me about that. How do you, as a Christian person, how do you respond to, let's say, Christians being worried about that or thinking that's a concern?
I'm still always more concerned about what people will do with the technology than what the technology will do itself. So for me, when I think about like incredible breakthroughs in medicine, right? It's amazing how quickly we can find new patterns and new diagnoses. And then I think, right, okay, how many years down the line before we can make the kind of calculations that insurance companies will quickly monetize, right? Like, I'm sorry, we're not going to pay for your treatment. We can tell that you have no more than 4 years left, right? Or I'm sorry, you're not eligible for this health insurance plan. You have this marker that we now know means you're going to, like, so for me, I'm not, maybe this is like not answering, I don't mean to not answer the question. I don't think we've done a good job keeping just the internet from degrading human values and shared discourse, right? And so, part of it is I think some of the super intelligence hype is coming from the people who own these companies. I'm not that worried we're that close to it. But I am much more concerned, and I think as Christians we ought to be much more concerned with the very long human habit of using what God might have given us for good instead to harm ourselves and harm other people. I think we should be dialed into the human power aspect of that.
Fair point, yeah. Anybody else want to respond to that?
I mean, I think that's a very sensible answer for sure. And if I were to try to answer your question more directly, I think it's a very large question mark. And Eliezer Yudkowsky, whose book you just cited, right? He had an article in Time where he was so serious about this that he advocated for an international ban on compute power and the size of data centers, and said the signatories should be willing to risk a nuclear exchange
war,
in order to enforce it. I think I'm skeptical of the worst case scenarios, and in part because I think that the idea of intelligence is doing a lot of hand-waving work in these scenarios. Although some of the main inflection point is the point at which AIs begin to train themselves and to work on themselves, which is one that we've already sort of crossed. So according to Anthropic, 90 to 99% of their code on Claude Code is generated by Claude Code. And then we don't fully understand how the system works or how the system that is helping the system improve works. So there are obviously, I think, reasons to be suspicious, at least, of how that turns out. And then I do think it's sort of along the lines that Dolores articulated. It's our capacity through hubris to create situations where technology becomes a kind of tragic force in human affairs. So the situation that I alluded to earlier with regards to the DoD's demand that Anthropic remove its prescription against using AI, both for mass human surveillance and also for autonomous weapons, right? So if we allow that, we've made a decision. It's not so much that the AI gained super intelligence and so wrought havoc on the human race. So we made a decision and empowered it in such a way that it potentially has catastrophic consequences.
And typically, if human beings can do it, they will try to find a way to do it. Some actor will try to do that, and potentially weaponize it or something. You want to say something about that?
I'll say something quick. And I think it's important to be. I don't want to go into this doom and gloom kind of phase and think, oh, it's all over because now we have Claude and ChatGPT, so now it's all, what's the point? I think the thing I'll start with is there's nothing new under the sun, like Solomon said. And at some point it was the Tower of Babel, and there was this new technology, and we're going to build this tower, we're going to be God, right? And we're going to reach heaven, and we're going to become in charge of our lives. The perception that I'm in charge of my life or that I own my life is a false perception. And if I can come from that standpoint, that kind of humble standpoint, then it doesn't actually matter. And in my world, of course, there are implications and hurt and harm potentials, all these things. But I just want to remind us that it's important to kind of come at this from, there have been tons of evil, from the beginning. I mean, what were the kings and the rulers doing in the biblical times, or kind of pre-biblical time, or till today? There are still people who are offering their children to the idols, right? As the scripture kind of talks about in the Old Testament, as something that was so broken and so busted, but that still exists. That still exists. So there is still evil, and if that evil is going to come through the form of whatever moral stance we have as Christians, or it's going to present itself in this way, my way of life or my walk shouldn't change. But are there implications that are social, political? For sure, certainly. Concerning things? Yeah. Certainly. But I don't want us to lose sleep over it.
It is. I think that's very centering to say, every generation wants to think that the threats that face it are unlike any other. Of course. And in some ways that diminishes the sovereignty of God over our lives and over our world and so on. So let's open it up. Maybe one of my fellows want to run the microphone. Who's going to do that? Isaiah? What a guy. Yeah. No, we can't have Ed do it. We need it to be you. So anybody that has a question, just want to raise your hand. Isaiah will bring the mic over to you. Yeah, over here. It's a long run, buddy.
He's getting his exercise in.
Hello. Okay, so Brian mentioned earlier that a common theme in all of your work on this subject is about slowing it down. And I'm just wondering, how are we practically supposed to do that when the messaging around AI is so aggressive? At least from what I've understood, it's like, oh, this is here, and you need to adapt to it, and if you don't, you're just gonna be left behind. And then similarly, communities are already being negatively impacted. Like, there are town hall meetings happening right now about these data centers that are being built and the billions of dollars that are being thrown at it. So, I I guess going back, what is the practical way that we can slow things down?
I'll start by acknowledging the sense that maybe we have, especially depending on our workplace and where we make our living, that things are being forced upon us, right? And so this is a long-standing pattern when new technologies, especially new technologies that are closely tied to financial profit, emerge. It's the language of technological inevitability, right? That resistance is futile. You have to get on board or you're going to be left behind. And they paint this picture of historical, technological progress. Historically, this has been the case, and everybody who doesn't jump on board somehow loses out. The language I used for this more recently is manufactured inevitability, right? So manufactured and the technological inevitability is not a natural force, right? It's a kind of reality that is being shaped by the powers that be who stand to gain from it. So this doesn't necessarily help the situation of the average person in a workplace who's being told. So I just had lunch with a former student of mine today who works at a very large company in Florida, whose name you would all recognize, and it is a mandate for them that they have to use AI. So it's checked on their computers, how many times are they using AI, which is essentially a way of sort of, having the employer train his replacement, the employee train his replacement. So I recognize, whenever I talk about technology and the choices we need to make, I recognize that there are varying degrees of agency, right? So the single mom is just trying to make do and trying to get through life has one degree of agency. The senator has another, Elon Musk has another, et cetera. But all of us do have choices to make, but those choices, it is important to recognize, do not necessarily come without a cost. Right? Now, I think Christians here are specifically well-positioned, right? Because the demands of the Sermon on the Mount, for example, have always seemed counterintuitive and hard to implement and impractical. And so a lot of literature has grown around the Sermon on the Mount to try to convince us that Jesus doesn't mean what he quite clearly seems to be telling us to do. And so I do find, though, right, that the paradox is that we're promised efficiency, optimization, all these gains, but there's this paradox that the more we implement these tools, the busier we feel, the more fragmented, the more hurried. So there are all sorts of actual productivity traps here. When you enhance productivity, you just raise demand, et cetera. At some point, I think maybe we just have to give up on the whole premise of modern society, that faster is better, that we're defined by our outputs, that efficiency is an unquestioned goal. These are all the idols of the age. And the thing is, it's hard to do on our own, but this is another sort of function of modern society, is that it has atomized us so that we feel that we must do all things by ourselves. But to the degree that I think mediating institutions like a local church, for instance, or a study-centered community can create a communal sense around a shared program of moderated use or of refusal, right? Then to that degree, I think we can begin to make progress. And I will say this is a matter of wisdom, which is to say that there's no right answer for every single individual, and a matter of calling, right? In what ways do we hear ourselves called, ourselves individually, our households, our communities like a local church? How do we hear ourselves being called by God to take certain actions? And for some of us, it is simply to be a sign of contradiction in the world.
That's good.
Right?
Yeah.
And maybe that means that we lose out on certain advantages, certain social standing. But the thing is, I really do believe that even when we make those sacrifices, what we will discover is that we gain something of far greater value. At the end of the day, it seems to me that most of us just need to be sitting in front of somebody who cares about us and will listen to us, right? To share a meal with somebody in the flesh. To build that kind of community. There are a vanishingly small number of technologies that I need to make that happen. All right. In one setting, I was asked what technology I approve of or what technology I think is a good one, and I said the table. The table is a wonderful technology. It gathers you, it separates you, creates the context for conversation. All right. And so I think the answer is just to maybe recognize that we need to not buy the hype, but not buy also the very vision of life that makes the hype plausible to begin with, and then find a community of people around which to instantiate these refusals, these countercultural ways of living, and to recognize that, in fact, it feels like we're sacrificing, but in that kind of death, we find a kind of life.
Yeah, real quick.
Real quick. It takes one to teach one. You have to decide to pull back. Jonathan Haidt, in his book, The Anxious Generation, talks about how it's really hard to get a kid to stop using social media. But if you get a bunch of moms in the classroom to stop their kids from using social media, then your kid isn't the loser, right? That's not on a cell phone, okay? So it takes one person to break the rule and then others to follow. And when there's a collection, it's no longer strange. There are stores that still sell handmade toys, and someone really likes making handmade toys, and there's an audience for that. But you could go to the store and you can buy some bread, but somehow making bread is now cool again, right? Like everyone makes their own bread. I make my own bread, and I think it's awesome. It's really cool in our house when we make a fresh loaf of bread. We've reverted to what was, now it's acceptable again. So it takes someone to break the mold, so I would encourage you to do it yourself on some level. It doesn't have to be an absolute or an absolute yes or no, but start by cutting out social media, for example. That's really hard to do, but it's a step that you can take.
No, it's good. And I think, as Christian people, we have to acknowledge our relationship to society as a whole has always been a minority position. That we were never meant to be anything other than salt. This incredibly important, powerful, and yet slight ingredient. So we're meant to be a counterculture, and we can make our own rules. We can choose moderation. We can slow down, and that does create a kind of hunger in people. A novelty. When everyone does one thing, and there's other group of people that do something different, people will be drawn in. I was talking to a bunch of authors, I think, and we were talking about there's going to be in the future there will be something that says in a book you read this was written by a human. That will be a thing in the future, and to be reading something that was written by a human will be kind of amazing. No, this was a real person that wrote this, and so some of us need to remember how to write books so that we can be there in that moment to be that counterculture, that minority position. Who else has a question? Yeah, okay, back there.
I'm getting a fair amount of a feel for the pitfalls of AI. I've probably listed about 5 or 6 on my phone as I'm listing that I'm thinking of. Are you seeing any legal liability in the future for AI? It seems very inhuman, but it doesn't always seem amoral. If someone is led through AI to commit suicide or something, would there be someone who would be sued?
So this has happened multiple times already.
Yeah.
And the answer is they so far are untouchable. Yeah, it's, in Florida, a teenager in Florida, with lots of people on the record that they were encouraged by this AI to commit suicide. I would be shocked if we see legal liability show up for that, but it does, because it isn't just suicide. People, one person was trying to work through some veterinary questions about her pet, and the AI kept suggesting euthanasia, and she was like, I don't think we're there yet. And then that afternoon, right? I'm not kidding. That afternoon, it unprompted was by the way, here's the closest place. They're still open. You can call now.
The dog's like, no, don't do it. Don't listen. Hallucinating.
Yeah. Well, she did though. She did do it, and then she regretted it, and she felt like she'd sort of been bullied into
Fido
it.
died. Oh no.
Legally, the only legal stuff I know of is. Yeah. So I was laughing, Brian, with this movie yesterday. That Ed Sheeran scene is kind of perfect, Because, yeah, it feels demoralizing, but also the only reason this character could do it was because the people known as the Beatles wrote the songs.
He didn't write
And the
them, yeah.
same is true, but the same is true for AI now. Like, why is it so amazing? Because it has been fed millions and millions and millions of texts written by humans, right? This is all built on the back of intellectual property theft. So there are actually some lawsuits ongoing right now. People whose, Michael's book's in there, right? People whose books, you look it up and like,
Yeah.
oh, you trained your AI on this book without permission. What that means is some people will get like $50, you know.
And we're probably not the best people to answer that in terms of policy or in terms of law, but I do think that we're ahead of our skis here. You know, the technology is happening faster than we can legislate it or than we can, you know, create healthy barriers around it. So all I would say is, as Christian people, as the church, as the people of God, this is our space. This is where, because we don't go for laws anyway, we go for hearts and minds. So this is where we should thrive, where we can enter into the conversation and influence people toward the kingdom or toward moral good, because that's our jam. You know, that's what we do. That's what we're interested in. And it'd be great if the laws could catch up or get ahead of these things, but I don't expect that to happen. I think that the rate of change is so rapid that the regulators don't even exist yet to create the regulations. The regulatory bodies don't exist around these things. They need to, no doubt. And that one guy's idea that we're going to get sort of world unification around regulating these things is pretty far-fetched. So,
And the lobbies to prevent that from happening are very strong already. So there's like no,
and
no
the money,
strong-
yeah, the OpenAI's $300 billion valuation, whatever, is not going to help that either. So, what else? Yeah, okay.
Back here, I think I read an article a while ago where, you know, they were saying the top 10 uses of ChatGPT or AI in 2024, it was like organizing your life and, you know, kind of normal things. And in 2025, the top one, it was a new one that jumped to therapy and companionship. And I guess I'm wondering how you guys see like therapy specifically, like people using therapy as a primary way they interact with ChatGPT or AI, and how that might affect maybe our mental health or how we relate to just our own identities and ourselves.
I can speak to this. The short answer is no. The longer answer is I can't tell you how many patients of mine just struggle with loneliness. And I think during the COVID pandemic, when we were on lockdowns, I think the worst pandemic than the virus was loneliness. And how many people got absolutely rocked in their mental health because they didn't have someone to talk to. They had neighbors, but they didn't have anyone to talk to. Do you know the names of the 4 houses or apartments that are around you, of the people that live in those homes? As Christians, we're called to love our neighbors, or love your neighbor as yourself. How can I love you if I don't even know your name? If I could be a source of companionship for my neighbor, even though I don't necessarily need the therapy, they may need it. So I would encourage you to be the relational piece. But from the standpoint of, does this thing fill the space of a human being that I need? Absolutely not. If I were to say, you know, I'll give a silly example, but I don't know if you're married, man, but so if my wife and I hang out with groups all the time, every night of the week, we go out and we hang out with groups. After a week, my wife will say something to me like, well, I really want some one-on-one time. And I'll say, well, we've been hanging out all week. She's like, no, I want to hang out with you. No, we've been together all week long, every single night of the week. And you're laughing because it's probably true, right? That you've heard something like this. But the idea of the one-on-one, there's nothing that compares. Even if I feel like I'm with someone, and that's what the AI piece is like. I feel like I'm with someone, but it's not a real person. There's something that happens in encounter that is so different than just typing.
Can I do a quick follow-up too? Yeah, and I think, so of course the kind of conversation that you have with a therapist is going to be different than the kind that you have with a friend. I don't think you should use AI for either, right? But in the case of friendship especially, I actually think, because you said therapy and companions, and this is what you hear people saying, right? They chat, my AI understands me. In addition to probably feeding the loneliness, I also think it's probably malforms you for human friendship, because actual human friends don't just meet your needs, they have needs of their own. And you can't just dump on them and then go, right? You are expected to give back, and you are expected to temper how much time you use by being concerned for them. And this asymmetry in AI friendships, right, is, I think, really, it's a continuing malformation away from being formed in the way that friendship requires.
You talk about sycophant, like AI is a sycophant. It thinks you're great. Every time I ask it something, it's like, what a great way to put it, Brian. And I'm like, yeah, I like this guy, you know? I think actually there's a shortfall in therapy itself, in talk therapy itself, this idea, this Freudian idea of unconditional positive regard. And these things are built to have unconditional positive regard, which I think, to Dolores's point, that's not human, you know? You can't just tell me, my husband's an idiot. Oh, you should leave him. He sounds like a terrible guy. If your therapist is like, whatever you say, when sometimes, have you done anything? Like, is there anything you can do better? That's human. Human is sensing and discerning and presence and grace. And a machine can't do that for us. So to me, it just seems even more sad, actually, that loneliness is compounded by your one friend being an algorithm, you know. Maybe one or two more questions. Yeah. Russell over here. You're loud enough. He's loud enough. He's got it. Yeah.
So working in ministry, I really see a lot of peers and people now that use AI to even write their sermon for Sunday morning, or you can go on Bible apps and use even devotionals that you pretty much know are written by AI. And I like to use the term, you can't microwave a brisket. It's a slow process, but how is this really going to have a greater ripple effect on Christianity if there is no, I can interpret God's word through experience, through the Spirit, and others? I mean, and even pastors aren't able to
That's a good question.
going forward because of AI.
Yeah, I recently wrote an article on this that I was going to publish, and then I was in several conversations and decided to not publish it, but now I wish I did.
This is recorded, by the way.
Yeah. But especially because the Pope just came out and explicitly told priests, don't use it to write sermons. So
The Pope said that?
that's kind of
The
a
Pope
trump
said
card.
that?
Yeah, yeah.
The Pope said it, Russell.
So it's from the Pope.
Don't do it.
Right.
Just don't do it.
But the word is even more important in Protestant faiths. I feel like the emphasis that Catholics put on, like, the homily is far less than it is in other denominations. But I think what's interesting is, yes, I think it is going to have a huge ripple effect on Christianity as a whole. There's something, obviously, that gets hollowed out if the message and the word of God that you're trying to communicate to other people who are there hungry for it, if you're giving them just some kind of canned response. And again, the fact that people are not necessarily seeing this, and even very devout Christians and Catholics very specifically that are building this Magisterium AI, Truthfully AI, are building it and marketing it specifically for these kinds of uses. Magisterium AI, and this was kind of what I had written the article about, on the interface, one of the prompts was specifically, help me write a homily. We call them homilies in Catholic Church.
We do too.
Oh, okay.
We like that
I
word
hear
too.
sermon a little bit more frequently. Help me write a homily, and then when I clicked it, it led me into a couple of other more specific use cases, if you will, or some examples to how to prompt it. And one of them was, help me write a homily for a funeral mass. And then you click that, and it said, use Ecclesiastes in the homily for the funeral mass. There's something so pastoral about being present for people in that moment. And when I've talked to a few priests about this, and they've kind of pushed back a little bit and been like, well, maybe there are certain instances in which, something happens really quick and you need something really fast. And I mean, this is the convenience rhetoric that's often touted to make these things attractive, and the convenience of them is very, very attractive. But that's a pastoral moment where you need to be present, and even if you say something that's incomplete or not perfect or sacrificing polish and the exact words that you feel like the family perhaps might need to hear, they would much prefer, and I'm sure everybody would say this, that if they're at their mother's funeral, they knew that the priest actually prayed over what they wanted to say before they came out and said it, even if it was for a minute. So I think as Christians, we have to be extremely intentional about ensuring that there are some spaces where we do not use it. There has to be spaces that are AI-free where it is not. We have to be really intentional about those limits and placing them where they need to be. I think writing homilies might be one of them.
I would just add, some of what we're talking about in a sense is elevating into the mystical. Like there's something that happens between human beings when God is present, and the invoking of his presence into a relationship, because it's seen by him, and his presence makes a difference in that relationship. And that can only happen between human beings made in the image of God, who is a God who exists in a triune community himself. And so I just think that for research, like to use the thing for research is great. In fact, I'm sure it's just another tool for research that allows us to maybe reach into places we couldn't have found before. But preaching is a mystery. Preaching is something that, Karl Barth talks about that moment where the preacher turns on the light of the lectern, and there's a hush across the crowd because everyone has this anticipation, this hope that we just might hear the voice of God. Bart also talks about the disappointment that everyone basically feels immediately afterwards when they mostly just hear a person. But all of us that preach know there is that moment where it isn't just a person. And maybe it doesn't happen every time, but it's what you hope for, it's what you pray for, it's what you aspire to. And if you're reading something that chat gave you, that is not going to happen. It's impossible for that to happen. So maybe one more question.
Can I say a super quick thing,
Yes,
just
sure.
connect, because I also think it can, particularly because I do so often talk about the dangers, I think we're getting way back to the first question. I think it's wrong of us to think of this totally in terms of just everybody's individual response. I think we should acknowledge how hard it is, right? I think if we don't want our pastors using ChatGPT to write their sermons, we should be okay with an occasional clunker, right? And we should just understand
Good point.
this is a person doing their best, right? We should not, and it's across the board, right? I really do think, it's like if you're trying to run a marathon and there are all these little scooters everywhere that like make you invisible and zip you to the finish line, right? How many people are going to jump on that thing, right? It's the temptations are everywhere. And then what we do is we raise our societal expectation in response to the technology. So now we're expecting a new level of output. And if we do that as a church, our pastors are, of course, going to use ChatGPT for their sermons, right?
We've been
So
conditioned
that's
well in the Catholic
our
Church.
role as well.
Lots of clunkers.
Yeah. Because we're people.
But you don't care, because as long as the Eucharist gets delivered,
That is
boom,
true.
game over.
That's what we're told. That's what we're
That's
told.
the beauty of it, man.
I will say this is my church. This is a no-clunker church. They're great. Yeah.
No clunkers. The pressure's really on now.
Little kids who can't go in.
Actually, I'm aware of the time, so I want to be sensitive to that. But because we are kind of out of time, I wonder if you guys could just give me a sentence or two, something, surgical here, of a word of hope or a word of how ought we to go away after this conversation. What's in your heart? And maybe this is a kind of human moment here for us for God maybe to speak through you to these guys? Like, what do you want to say? What parting thought would you want to give?
I think the main thing I want to say is it's, I think, up to us as a church to really think about a world worth wanting, what that really looks like for us in the future, and not to just passively receive the world that people tell us is inevitable. It's something that we absolutely can shape, and it's up to us to shape it by making really intentional choices about what we want to keep human, what we want to be dignified, what it means to dignify the human being in the context of work, in the context of learning, and building our institutions to reflect that. If we kind of systematize artificial intelligence into every aspect of our institutions, that's the really quick way to ensure that it's going to atrophy what the human connection and our capacity for love. So that's what I would say.
Thanks.
I'm going to go really highbrow and reference an Adam Sandler movie. I love Russian literature. I love literature in general. This is where I expect to find prophetic voices. But there is a movie that I did not anticipate being so prophetic called Click. Anybody seen Click with Adam Sandler?
I'm embarrassed to say I have seen that movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm embarrassed to say it was an Adam Sandler movie that made me cry in a movie theater. I did not see that coming, right? But it's just the guy gets a remote control and he can start fast forwarding through certain aspects of life. And so he starts skipping the stuff that feels like drudgery. And then, of course, spoiler alert, he's suddenly at the end of his life. And it turns out the drudgery was the life, right? Like he missed most of it. And I just think as we use AI, again, I just use it for my birds, right? But if we're using it, as we're using it, like, what are you skipping? And was that supposed to be formative? And is this some of the drudgery that ends up actually making you what you are? I don't think it always is, but I think it is more than we think that it is.
Thanks.
I think we are bound as Christians by the theological virtue of hope, right? And that is not optimism about the future. So I have long had J.R.R. Tolkien's words in a letter sort of etched in my mind that we, in many ways, are fighting the long defeat before the final victory. So I think our call is to be faithful in the world. It is not, in my view, to transform the world or to change the world. God is in control, and his providence is often mysterious to us, but we are assured that we serve a resurrected Christ, and that our hope is in him, and not necessarily in what we're able to affect and the way that we're able to change the world that we live in, which might in fact grow very difficult and very hard. And we've been promised tribulation. We've also been promised the helper and the comforter and the joy of the resurrection.
That's good. Yeah.
St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11:1, and I always remember because it's 1:1:1, with the one in front of 1 Corinthians. He says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. So I think our job is to imitate Christ. And if we can imitate him who is lowly in heart and gentle, we can change the world. And I'll tell you a story from a book that I'm reading. The book is called Courage to Pray. And I just read this last night, so this is kind of why it's on my mind. It was on my mind all day today. The author talks about water. And he talks about if you want to be humble, you should be like water. Water always finds the lowest place. It always sinks down to the lowest place. And he talks about how if we collectively are all water finding the lowest place, we will be invincible. Because when there's enough water, there's nothing that can stop it, right? You see what a wave can do to a house or a hurricane can do to a city, right? If there's enough of us finding that lowest place, we will be invincible. So let's imitate Christ in our lowliness and our humility, and all of these things will come to pass.
Amen. Can Can we give these guys some thanks? Okay. We're really glad you guys came. I'll just leave you with this thought. This is the Apostle Paul who said, "For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all of creation will be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus, our Lord." If we're prone to fear, be hopeful. If you're prone to optimism, be a little concerned. If you're prone to adopting technology without thinking about it, maybe pause and struggle a little bit with that, guys. Be deliberate and intentional about the patterns that you create by using these things and what you lose. If you're prone to rejecting new things or refusing something because it's new and don't want to try it, maybe experiment a little. Try to understand it better before you critique it and see the common grace that is already there. And I'll leave you this from Psalm 46. Because no matter what happens, God is our refuge and our strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. He says, "Be still and know that I am God, and I will be exalted among the nations, and I will be exalted in the earth." Lord, thank you for tonight. Thank you for these minds and hearts who have led us and instructed us and wrestled through, in many ways, things that are bigger than us, too marvelous for us. But we trust you more, and we're thankful for the promise of your presence through whatever comes next. Give us wisdom, help us to be salt and light in the world around us. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you guys for coming. I'm sure they'll hang out a little bit if you want to have a personal convo.